Hello Bits and Bones, my name is Slady V, and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about The Lovely Bones, in what will be the first of a two-part review. This first video will be my review of the book in and of itself. Then I'm going to watch the movie and write a follow-up on comparing the two, potentially looking at how well the adaptation held up to the source material, but as you'll see in my review of the book, maybe I would prefer it didn't stick to the book quite so much. If I had my way back when I first started my channel, I would have kept it almost exclusively about the difference between books to movies, reviews about the adaptations and how things went with all that, but I really couldn't keep up with the heavy reading load that required. If you'd like to see me read a book and consequently compare the movie, all of my Bone tier patrons in my Patreon get movie voting, and the one and only Revenant tier of every month gets to choose a book. So you could rig the system if you really wanted that, if you felt so inclined. Because nowadays there are so many adaptations coming out, it's really hard to pick which one to invest in. Speaking of which, you can keep an eye out for my take on the new Dexter season, probably. I haven't started watching any of it, but considering that I did read the book source material and have watched the entire first season, you can expect that I'll have something to say about the new one. So on to The Lovely Bones. I read The Lovely Bones a little while ago, couple months. Until I got an app for ebooks on my library, my reading selection had been exclusively determined by what I could pick up at the thrift store. And where I'm from, The Lovely Bones is seemingly quite popular because it felt like every other time that I went in to find myself some books at the thrift store, it was there on the shelves. In fact, during the move that I just had and was reunited with all my old stuff, I ended up having 2 copies of The Lovely Bones in my collection somehow. Why was The Lovely Bones so popular and critically acclaimed? I didn't know, and I wanted to find out. The Lovely Bones had more or less been on my to-read list since I was in public school. I remember it coming in big. I think it was a Battle of the Books book, actually. Not confirmed, but that's what my childhood memories are telling me, because the first time I remember seeing it was on a poster in our tiny, shitty little library that didn't get anything new except what it had to for such sort of special events. And let me just say, what the fuck? Who markets this book to preteens? I distinctly remember The Lovely Bones becoming big and being distributed among my peers, and it was the 2000s, and shit was not as censored as it is now, but I cannot imagine reading this when I was even in high school yet. Although, maybe that's the point. If 13-year-olds were reading this, they weren't really getting it. There's a teacher's guide of questions to ask your students in the back of the Lovely Bones novel, and that leads me to believe that part of its distribution to younger audiences was a matter of discussing the grander concepts and not the actualities. But listen, I read The Lovely Bones directly after reading Gillian Flynn's first 2 novels, Sharp Objects and Dark Places, and it was The Lovely Bones that made me physically uncomfortable, queasy, and so deeply disturbed and upset that I had to put it down after the first chapter, which is about 15 fucking pages. I literally put it down for a week. I couldn't do it. And as intrigued as I was by how, viscerally I reacted to it, I couldn't pick it up and just straight read it like any other book. This was the first time this had really happened to me. I had to keep picking it up and reading like half a chapter at a time because I just couldn't handle it. Moral of the story is, this is not a book for young audiences, and at the beginning at least, is not for the gentle-spirited, no matter what age you are. I'm glad that looking at newer reviews and places selling the book today aren't saying, oh yeah, the main character is a kid so the novel is for kids, like how dumbass marketers used to do it. That's why all us 90 kids are so perpetually messed up. Because if I could rate books, this would be a solid M, if not R, rating. And after the first 15 pages, it didn't get much better after that introduction. We go from the sickeningly graphic rape and murder of Susie Salmon in the first chapter of The Lovely Bones to the devastating aftermath of that tragedy. That evil act engulfs and consumes everyone that was close to her. I was not exaggerating when I say The Lovely Bones ripped my heart out. I like disturbing and fucked up shit. I seek it out because it usually doesn't bother me, but this was different. The story was humanizing. It genuinely hurt me the moment Susie's hat was returned to her mother and the officer explained that it was likely used as an instrument to silence Susie during the murder, because it was worse than either of them could actually fathom, because we, the readers, were there during it. Watching the events that transpired in the immediate aftermath felt real. Not just in the technical events, but the reaction of the characters. Watching a family deform and fall apart was both chaotic and tragic and just so very human. Every time there was a new discovery, Susie's hat, her body part, her kill spot, it just kept getting sadder. The Lovely Bones brought into my perspective a whole new side of death and grief. It made me ask a lot more questions than I was prepared for. When the townsfolk held a vigil for Susie, my personal reaction was to be mad, a bit disgusted, that a group of people on the outskirts of Susie's life and never really knew her would find it fit to do something so resolute, while her actual family was still in the throes of grief with no idea what really happened to her. But the Lovely Bones gave me the bigger picture because our protagonist, although she is dead, is Susie, omnipresent and more understanding. And my singular human frustration turned into accepting that, although they didn't know Susie as well or love her as deeply, didn't mean that they were unaffected. The disappearance of a child so spontaneously shakes a community, because even if you didn't know her, it's that you could be her. It's that this even happens, affects you. And you start to see all sides of grief and understanding from Susie's perspective in The Lovely Bones. You feel it in a variety of different ways, through different characters, and slowly, sadly, but beautifully, you start to see life move on. After something so heart-wrenching, although it never truly goes away, people keep going. And the first portion of the Lovely Bones novel is this unique mix of humanizing pain and spiritual awakening. I can see how some people might not like the writing style of Alice Sebold, but it flowed for me, and the voice hit all of the spots I did and didn't want it to. The narration about Susie's dismembered body leaking through the bag and staining her murderer's garage just to have the stain overlooked by new home buyers was so unsettling for me. Listening to her describe where her body actually ends up and how a kind man unknowingly helped her murderer dump her in a garbage pit because it's a heavy load really messed me up. The Lovely Bones really played on my morbid fascination to a point where it's like, I don't want to know that. The juxtaposition of friendly, peaceful neighborhood to the devastating death of this young girl getting dragged through it, and nobody knows, is so disturbing. I loved the way Susie, after death, was able to recontextualize her mother as an individual. It was refreshing seeing her as, maybe she wasn't a mother. Maybe she liked parts of it and was good enough at it, but that wasn't who she felt she was. And seeing her affair in the wake of her grief and leaving her remaining children as something not condemnable was so good. I was prepared, with how much and readily The Lovely Bones made me cry, to give it a 5-star rating. Hands down, I was ready to slap a perfect rating on it, put the review as, "Welp, that fucked me up, fam," and retire. Unfortunately, The Lovely Bones did not maintain this quality of poignancy, and it got a little weird. To start, on my criticisms of The Lovely Bones, I had no problem with Susie's stories from her heaven. I thought that it was a good way to break up the heavy shit happening on Earth and a whimsily philosophical take on the afterlife. That's not where I'm going to go with this at all. Part of, and my first criticism of The Lovely Bones, is that from the ongoing tragic aftermath of Susie's death, which is really more of a bunch of little character pieces, it turned a little bit into a thriller. Kind of. It had me so hooked because of the emotional investment I had with the characters that I was on the edge of my seat when Susie's father would get too close to the killer, feel something is off but have no way to prove it. Especially when her sister decides to take their father's instincts into her own hands and break into the murderer's house to get evidence and almost get caught. The whole time she's in there, I was like, oh god, oh no, this is not going to end with him taking the sister too. My heart could not handle it. But he didn't catch her, and they got some damning evidence against him. But the killer skipped town before he could get caught. And that's where The Lovely Bones takes a strange sort of turn as a story. As much as the point of The Lovely Bones was heavily character-driven, and relies on our emotional investment and release, seeing those characters develop, it went on a bit too long. Not long in physicality necessarily, but long in what it decides to cover. And the problem with that is that even as I went and I was getting a little bit bored, just the average narration of life of characters that had once been so touched by this tragedy, there were still some pretty good moments. So it's hard to say, at least for me. As much as the lead-up felt unnecessary, I don't know if it would have hit the same without it, because everyday life is boring. Even after all that time in those pages and I was just racing through to find something less boring, it still hurt me when Buckley, grown into a preteen by that point, had an argument with his dad about using Susie's things. There were still hints of that devastating loss sprinkled in all those pages later, when you could find them. And again, it was one of those toss-up situations I really liked the nuance on. Who was in the right and wrong? Was Buckley wrong for recycling Susie's possessions for something he could use when he barely had a memory of her at all because he was too young when it all happened? Was his father wrong for hoarding Susie's stuff and holding her on a pedestal disconnected from the love he shows his living children? It's hard to say. We'll get to my rant after I conclude that overall the book felt like it ended without nearly as much consequence and weight as when it started. Everyone grew up and out of each other, and although the logical conclusion was to have them slowly come back together, it felt forced after the amount of time and development they'd spend away. The refreshing exposure I got to the human visceral reactions and development characters went through was undermined by them being blandly happy. The parents mutually loving each other after the affair and separation, and then a decade later they're like, I don't know, maybe we loved each other all along and we'll just try again. Like, what? And a weird thing about The Lovely Bones was us zooming back to the killer's perspective, of him going back to the neighborhood, thinking of Susie's sister, Lindsay, the one who got away, and the thriller aspect came back again. I was asking myself, is shit going down? Is something going to happen? And while kind of stalking that old neighborhood hunting ground, he almost gets caught. He almost gets recognized. Or at least gets recognized as creepy by a woman on the street and then leaves, and that's just it. And I was like, why are you blueballing me? Why did you add that just to have it mean absolutely nothing? Was it to unsettle us that this evil man returned to the scene of the crime, but the community that professed to mourn Susie didn't actually bother learning his face, so he got away a second time? Because fine, that's fucked up. But it doesn't make for an engaging story. It kind of irked me. In a weird way, I didn't need Harvey to pay for his crimes as the story was more focused on how life goes on unresolved. But getting the bit that he dies, quite honestly, in a pathetic, stupid manner and meaninglessly, while pursuing another victim adds nothing to this for me. I'd rather not know. Now, for the ultimate rant of The Lovely Bones and why, no matter everything that it put me through, it can't be anywhere close to 5 stars anymore. I felt like The Lovely Bones was a masterpiece at the start. It was riveting, I was hooked, engaged, emotionally messed up. I liked the surreal monologuing, even if most people didn't. And yes, it went on a bit too long with too much to say about nothing. But as much as I could tolerate those boring passages, I could not abide the supernatural bullshit that happened at the climax. Pun intended. For how surreal and beautiful the story had set up Susie as the narrator and viewer of the human world after her death, both those storylines and realities seemed like they were coming to a reasonable close. Something sweet and bland we could all move on from and see the beauty and life in. But then, Susie's spirit comes busting into her almost not quite acquaintance of a lesbian medium friend to have sex with the boy she had her first and only kiss with. Because I guess that's what was truly holding her back from being at peace. I'm being a bit blunt in my synopsis, but holy shit, this scene was so unnecessary. It shattered everything, the entire aura of the novel. We have ghost possession and sex now. Like, I don't care if she matured in the afterlife. It's fucking creepy. It's weird. I don't like it, and I know the writer must have thought this would be sweet, that they got to play out their undiscovered love for one another using a willing surrogate. But it's not. I thought the whole point of this was to gain acceptance and move on, and here we are about to close up the book and suddenly we're thrust into a fanfic of what-ifs fulfillment. Absolute bullshit. I hated it. I've never gone from loving something so much to hating it so much. This is the first time that I felt myself channeling those unreasonably angry reviewers giving books shit reviews over nothing. In the end, I didn't give it a terrible rating, because I couldn't disregard how much the beginning of the novel had impacted me, but I'm mad that it was ruined. So now, I'm in an interesting position. As much as The Lovely Bones was big when I was young, I had also noted its resurgence when the motion picture came out. And now that I've gone through this emotional turmoil, I can't not watch that too, right? Normally I go into movie adaptations hoping for a faithful reenactment, but this time I'm hollering Jesus take the wheel because 1. The latter half of the novel brought the score of the book down by half from the start, and probably should have done more. And 2. There is no tasteful way to do this one for one, and no one should ever want to see that, so this'll be interesting. I am both excited and scared for the upcoming review of the Lovely Bones movie, so keep your eye out for it. If you've read The Lovely Bones, please tell me your thoughts on it. It's a polarizing work through and through. I don't think I've ever seen a review section as crazy as the one on Goodreads for The Lovely Bones, so you all must have some conflicting opinions too. As always, I'd like to thank my patrons. If you're interested in supporting me, I've linked my Patreon down below. Don't forget that if you become a Bone tier, you can vote on movies, and if you're a Revenant tier, you can make me read a book. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.